morning, uh, everyone in this virtual space of ours. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Vale, and I work with APC, the Association for Progressive Communication, and I'm sitting in a small country in Europe, Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it's an early morning here. I'm very happy and honored to be able to be all together to talk of an issue that it's interesting, exciting, but also can run on the dangerous side of assumption. With us, we have 4 wonderful activists, humans, citizens, users, because we have a multi-identity. And so let's start. We will have a round of 2 questions to just set the tone. And if you want to ask question, you can raise your hand in the chat, and we will be happy to hear also your voice so that we don't consolidate the entire power of the one who speak and seen and can be seen. So I will start with the first question and invite Subha to open the conversation. So as you have seen, we have the entire conversation is around smart city, no? So what a smart city is, what does this technology mean in the different contexts we come from. Subha comes from Sri Lanka, Smita from India, Shubha is in Nepal, and Dana is in Taipei. So a very different, larger, smaller community. So let's start with Subha and trying to understand smart city, and if this is the kind of jargon that it's used, what smart city means from your place of action. Subha, over to you.
Thanks very much, Vale. And I think your audio went very weak. I think after you sort of stopped holding your microphone, we weren't able to hear you as well. Just letting you know for your next round of questions. Thanks very much for having me, and also for this great conversation. And it's really an honor to be on this really wonderful panel with really great friends and colleagues. So I think the smart city in my context, I'm based in Colombo in Sri Lanka. And I think the language that we've heard used here since 2009, I think, which was sort of marked the end of the end of the war, though we don't really like to call it that, because it was really what it was the end to the armed conflict, right? It ended the sort of armed conflict part of a conflict, but obviously it was a very militaristic kind of approach to a very long and protracted civil war, which was the result of obviously really deep issues, which of course were never really addressed. So since about 2009, the language that we've heard here in the context of Sri Lanka and particularly Colombo is that of the world-class city. So the government at the time of 2009, which is again the government that we have in power at the moment, embarked on this really wide-ranging and really massive scale world-class city project, which really, kind of led to a lot of really terrible sort of repercussions, the most extreme of which was the forced eviction and relocation of thousands of working-class families from the urban center, from the heart of Colombo. What we also saw as a result of this whole world-class city development kind of paradigm is that we really saw an increasing technocratism, which really just means that it's all sort of experts and professionals who are now leading policy, right? Who are leading and designing this so-called world-class city, and are also leading a lot of economic and political policy around the building of a world-class city. So even at the moment, I think particularly with the new president and the new government as of about the last 6 or 7 months, we've really seen an increase of this kind of technocratism. So there's no space for the public or for public participation or for civil society or for any other kind of consultant to have a voice in this process, right? It's really being led very much by experts and professionals. And so that is who is kind of telling us the kind of city we should live in. I also want to say, just in 2020, the kind of smart city project was announced just months ago. And one of the really concerning and interesting things that kind of jumped out at me and many of us was that that includes the installation of more than 200 CCTV cameras across our city. So this is part of the smart city project that is, now kind of the wheels are turning on that. So, I mean, again, I think it really begs the question of what actually makes cities safe and what actually makes cities safe for us, for women, or for other kinds of marginalized people, like people with disabilities. And I think repeatedly from other contexts, having studied other contexts, particularly feminist researchers and urban developers and designers have repeatedly said that CCTV surveillance does not actually make our cities safer, right? There are really some really basic structural things that do make our cities safer in a much more effective way. Better roads, for example, better public transport, I think better childcare systems within workplaces, better labor laws, and I think certainly, I mean, better and safer streets, right? I think which kind of begins with safer public transport. So I think I'll just leave that there for now. And I'm sure we'll get into some of the other nuances of this as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Subha. Over to Smita. If you want to briefly introduce yourself. Sorry, because I have been very informal. I know all of you. And let's articulate the smart cities, language, jargon, possibility, and desire. Smita.
Thank you, Vale. Hi, I'm Smita. I'm currently joining in from Delhi. Until recently, I was associated with an organization called Point of View, working at the intersection of gender, sexuality, and technology. And I'm really glad that Subha kickstarted the session so well, because I think there are a lot of similarities in the South Asian context, particularly because in India right now, the government has sanctioned $420 million in this pursuit of smart cities. And the primary reason that they're citing for this is women's safety over and over again. Now, have they asked the women who they're protecting is a whole other question. But I think it's also essential that you also think about what technology they're seeing as essential for the women's safety, right? A lot of the money which is being allocated is towards CCTV cameras, facial recognition software and databases, as well as similar sort of technology like geofencing and things which are present in safety apps once again. And I think it's important that we think about this a little more, because CCTV cameras, which are based on cameras, are inherently a racist technology. Cameras were invented as a replacement for painting, and who were being painted at that point, right? It was aristocrats, Caucasian people, white people. So cameras do not capture darker skin but well. And this has been proven time and again with multiple studies showing that cameras just cannot capture dark skin. Now, you're going to base your entire safety model on this one software. You're then using images captured by this camera and running it against facial recognition softwares. Facial recognition softwares are, again, extremely racist. A colleague had once, my colleague who's doing their PhD looking at facial recognition and technology, had shared during the last IGF that the facial recognition softwares were first used by British colonizers in India and other colonies because they couldn't understand, they couldn't differentiate between different people working in the farms. So they thought it's easier if they just get fingerprints of people and put it there. This then evolved into facial recognition because they're like, okay, you know what? Now we have a computer. Let's use that and see how we can distinguish people. But once again, a lot of research as recent as 2019, shows that facial recognition softwares work best with white men. As simple as that. They have incredibly low rates of success with women. They have literally 0% of success with non-binary identities and trans persons. This is across 4 major facial recognition softwares, including that of Amazon, IBM, and 2 others, all of which are also already being used by police departments in the US. Indian government had also proposed a national database, a national searchable database, which would directly tie up with the National Crime Record Bureau in the country. And the idea of this database was that it would be a website and an app where you can basically click anyone's photo and scan it against this huge database, right? More worryingly, it also said that people could upload photos of people. Now, in India, where there is increasing right wing and conservative politics, there is increasing concerns. I mean, not increasing, it is already here. There is crackdown on activists, there is crackdown on dissent, there is vigilantism, particularly against Muslims, against those oppressed castes, underprivileged castes, and there is also extreme violence against anyone who doesn't fit into the binaries of gender and things, right? In this kind of a scenario, in a country where skin color doesn't just stay as skin color, it also has caste class connotations. It also has implications of whether someone is seen as safe or unsafe. In this kind of a scenario, do we want to bring in technology and look at technology as the only solution for women's safety, right? And in the past, we have seen that when we disengage technology from the politics, when we disengage technology from perspective and from the lived realities of people, they have never worked. And we can go more into this in the next question, because the question is that, have you asked the women who you're protecting if they want this? Is another whole other question. I'll stop here right now, but thank you.
Thank you. So as we see, the way in which we look at society, the politics that this society or government implement, they're coming to bring all their reflection into the smart city, the one we have, the one we would like. So let's explore a bit from the remaining two areas. So from listening to Shubha from Nepal and see what and how we can articulate this question in your country. Thank you.
Thank you, Vale. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shubha, and I'm from an organization called Body and Data, and we are based in Nepal. We work on digital right. So from building on to what Smita and Subha have already said, and we keep joking how Nepal learns from our neighborhood country, especially India. Like this joke never ends, looks like. But same with the idea of smart city. So as far as I know, and I'm aware through my search, this idea of smart city is not that old. It's only been like a couple of years that Kathmandu municipality mostly has taken it, right? Within the framework of this whole digitalization Nepal, digital Nepal, e-governance kind of thing, along with a lot of other digitalization process. And just in Kathmandu, the capital of the country, which is like really tiny, there are like 4 smart city projects that has been contracted. And I think it comes from definitely from this idea of like what development is. Like previously, the idea of development is usually imposed on our kind of countries, like in the south, from this like white, from the west, of like, okay, they need these kind of development. And like just to look at what is happening in the country, at least, like there's a massive infrastructural development that has been happening for many years, like road, buildings, other infrastructure. And here, when technology is entering, that is again kind of creating this environment where technology is seen as a savior, right? Like how technology is now going to come and then solve all our problem, including the social, economic, and cultural problem. That is how it's been framed. And like I was saying, there are like 4 smart city projects that are like being taken place while we are talking. And they, like, I quote, they want to promote modern infrastructure and facilities for high class experience. So also just to unpack this, it's really funny, like what is this high class experience, right? Like what do we even mean by modern? And what is the context that we live in at the moment, given the class hierarchy, given the caste dynamic? There's a lot of issues around like what is happening in terms of marginalized community. And just to give an example, one of the smart city project falls under this indigenous communities within Kathmandu. And there are like actually 4 different development projects that cross through this area called Kokana. It's indigenous area where, you know, people have been living there with their own culture, with their own ethnic and religious experiences. And what is happening there in Kokana itself is now because of Smart City project, which has been implemented without the proper consultation with the community itself, right? People are now in the verge of being displaced. They are now being asked to relocate. And some of these people, they don't even have proper paperwork to show to the government that the land belongs to them, because that is how the practice has been. That is how indigenous community works. Um, and then basically the authorities have been using a lot of force so that they can, you know, bring in this like development narrative of what the community need. And the district that I live in, this is the another example, 2 smart city projects are crossing this district, so we don't know what's going to happen, right? Like we don't even know the full information of what is the smart city, who is it smart for, who is it serving for, and is it actually what they are claiming to provide high class services and amenities for certain kind of people. But just to check on the reality, like where we are, you know, our local transportation is not that great, like we all know. Our public health services is poor, and only the COVID has only brought the reality in front of us. The education, public education and private, is really expensive. There's a lot of social, cultural and political inequalities like caste, gender, you know, caste, and those are affecting people in day-to-day experiences. Whereas now we want to bring in technology and infrastructure as the savior so that they can solve all the problem. Whereas just to mention like how along with smart city, there might be a lot of surveillance, like how Subha and Smita were mentioning earlier. And given the context of Nepal, we don't exactly have the right to data protection and privacy. So I'm just going to leave it to that and maybe come to this question around women's safety in the next question. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we see displacement, relocation, indigenous community culture, and the culture of paper, so that the area become crowded and crowded. Let's move with and hear from Dana in Taipei. And let's see how the smart city are articulated, if it's even a word that it's used. Dana, over to you.
Hi, thank you for being here with us. And I'm Dana. I'm working with a feminist organization that works for gender equal access to technology, and I'm based in Taiwan. I think in Taiwan, the concept of smart city is a small part of a bigger conversation of open government. The little one is much more popular and well known. Basically, the national government pays more attention on open government, while the local government talks more about smart city. In order to promote an open government, Taiwan government has been trying to make its data accessible and open. Not perfect, but it's improving. At the same time, the government is trying to digitalize all their public service, national and local. Although Internet of Things and smart infrastructures have been essential elements in terms of smart city, but I have to say the progress of IoT and smart infrastructures is the least comparing to open data and the digitalization of public service. I think budget is a big issue. So far, the focus of the local government about promoting smart city are mainly about how to make public service more accessible and convenient, such as how to find parking space in minutes. Because parking in cities in Taiwan, in most big cities, is a big issue. And how to monitor weather for agriculture, how to prevent natural disaster, as Taiwan is an island that is easily influenced by typhoon and earthquakes, and how to improve the efficiency of public agencies, including police station. I have to say that the issue of safety has not been paid a lot of attention in our conversation of smart city. I think it's really because of the local context. So generally speaking, I think Taiwan is a safe country. Just a very small example. Yesterday, when I returned to home by subway, I saw a phone was left at the public charging station of the subway station, together with the owner's handbag, but the owner was not there. He or she just left all their stuff there for minutes like that. So you can see from this little thing that what kind of strong signs of security that the people in the country is having. But there are a couple of cases about safety. A system that aims to collect family with higher risk for the children and analyze the potential risk that the children may face, which is called risk evaluation system, helping decide when social workers should visit these families and do interventions. Is developed in one city, and also the same city tried to build one system helping investigation of police by combining all the personal data that's collected from different systems. But both system comes from one city whose mayor was a police before. So I have to say the case is very special. So to summarize, as far as I observe, Taiwan government has been working hard on digitalizing all its public service and make its data accessible. And its efforts on smart city are also mainly about this. Actually, the concept of smart city is popular among private sectors that see this as a chance to develop their business in Taiwan. And their concerns are mainly driven by the potential interest. Yeah, I think that's so far I want to share. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And then, okay, so this is the big thing, no? The mass city, the Internet of Things, the technology, the background. And let's try to do the next step and connect with the other part of our conversation, that is women's safety, no? What does means women's safety? Who are those women? So we will have another round, and then if people want to already start put their question in the chat or want to prepare, we will have a round of conversation. So everyone has like 3 minutes, and then can look also in the chat for me to sign. I will try also to do in a message, but let's start with Dana. We will go in the reverse order to hear a bit what does it mean. We said that you said that tech it's a private sector opportunity. So when we connect this with women's safety, which is a public and the same time a private issue, no, it's a social important issue. Thank you, Vanna. We can't hear you.
Sorry, yeah. So as I mentioned, safety is not a big concern in terms of smart
city discussion, but it doesn't mean women in Taiwan are pretty safe. When we talk about safety, we need to re-examine what does that mean when we say safety. Usually we are talking about physical safety, but what about safety in the virtual space?
Am I safe if my private information or my intimate photos were exposed online? What is the role of technology in such situation? Early this year, media in both Korea and Taiwan were overwhelmed by the news of the N's Room case. The N's Room is a criminal case involving blackmail, cyber sex trafficking, and the spread of sexually exploitative videos via Telegram application between 2018 and 2020
in South Korea. Basically, the abuser who's
I'm not sure like how many people here know this case, so I will give a very brief introduction. So basically, the abuser whose nickname is God created a couple of groups on Telegram, simply naming these rooms with numbers. Both the abusers and the group members can use the group to share non-consensual intimate photos. This kind of behavior also attracted more copycats who upgrade their abusive behaviors,
threatening women and taking photos and videos of them by figuring out their personal information.
Although the nth room case happened in the South Korea, it attracted a lot of attention in Taiwan. One reason is because the two countries are very close in many different levels as neighbors. But the other reason is because non-consensual distribution of intimate images online is a big issue in Taiwan, and many women are victims. These intimate images and videos were uploaded on porn website by naming the people in the video, which might create a horrible consequence. That's why people in Taiwan shows great concern on the nth room case. The decision makers even proposed a new law which tried to regulate the behavior of non-sensual distribution of intimate images. In the discussion, Telegram was also criticized for its protecting its users' privacy, which created a secured space for the abusers to conduct the crime. However, we all know Telegram is also praised for its security, which is crucial for protecting its users' privacy. Also, in the discussion, I felt there is an assumption that all the videos were shared by abusers. This kind of assumption could be very dangerous since it's against sex positive. What about if I just want to share my sex mate video? The key thing is the consent instead of sex, but this is missing in many discussions. So in this case, we can see another thing besides thinking about women's safety in the digital space. Technology may not be neutral, but it has its boundary. More comprehensive conversations about this struggle may be needed.
I think maybe I can share for now, and maybe later I can add more thoughts. Yeah.
Thank you. Shubha, so what is women's safety in this dream of technology solving and make our lives easier?
Thank you. Like whenever the conversation of safety tech comes in, it's always so, yeah, there are always people on two different poles, right? Like it's so complicated and it's a bit messy. And I think we need to actually dissect why it is messy and like what is it? Like what are people actually saying? What are these women actually saying? But at the same time, like there are always like these incidents in our countries where someone would be harassed in a public transport, and there would be this outcry of asking government to install CCTV cameras on the street, on the buses. Like recently in Nepal, there was a pornography ban because there were the increase of sexual violence. So how all these reasons to curtail laws from right to information, freedom of expression comes from the lens of protecting women. Something happens to women and girls, and the government try to curtail our civil liberties. That has always been there. But at the same time, there are also other forces that are acting within the spaces. Like, I keep getting advertisement of track your girlfriend, track your partner kind of apps on my phone. So what does this even mean, right? Like if I want to track my partner for like what? Like is it for protection? Is it to basically surveil these bodies? Like what is it? And the other really popular smart technology when it comes to women's safety is safety apps. So a lot of local governments, NGOs, as well as private companies, they keep offering these safety apps that women can install on their phones, free of cost in most of the cases, and they can basically notify when they are in risk, when they are in a situation where they are not safe. While at the same time, I think we need to actually look into, so what is actually violence according to these apps? Are they in an assumption that violence happens outside on the street or in public transport when these women are alone? The narrative of perfect victim has to be dissected, because violence can happen within the household by our own family members, by people we already know. And data has shown enough of who are the perpetrators of violence, right? And then also at the same time, like all these safety apps, one of the common feature that they have is reporting to your local police station or your relative or your family. But we all know how legal and justice system in our countries are. Only if the police and legal system were safer, and if they were, listening to women, that would change so many things. If I want to report to the police through an app, And if I would get victim blaming, I don't know what would that mean, right? For example, if I'm walking on the street at night, I'm like in the risk of being harassed or molested. And if I ping to the police, my police might tell me that also, why did you walk on the street at night then? So the attitude of people, the cultural and the moral policing that happens within our society is also reflected in these kind of system, right? And then violence is like who are the victims of violence is also something we need to look into. These kind of apps and technology are usually very ableist. They usually are thinking of only certain kind of bodies who can get violated, right? What about those women in indigenous communities who are now being displaced in the name of smart city now, right? So the technology are displacing these women, whereas you are installing new technology to protect them. So just to look into why the violence happens, right? Like violence is rooted in the system of patriarchy. It's rooted in our own culture. And this just technology on its own not going to solve it. Technology is just a tool. Like it is not something that would come and then change your whole life kind of thing. And just my last point of this private versus public discourse and discussion, like feminists have been saying this for many, many years, many decades, of how we can't just dissect private into public. And what these kind of technology are doing is again promoting this dichotomy of public versus private, whereas privacy and the matter about how women's life are within public spaces and private spaces are complicated, right? Like we have always been saying private is political. You have to look into private life to see how it is impacting women's life and what is the reality. And when I say women plus other people in marginalized community, and also like LGBTI folks, people with disabilities, and all those things. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So if you look at the smart city, we see it's a network now of CCTV, little program, little an infrastructure that connect the dots, no? And those dots then are the one that through apps articulate what the safety is and for who is the safety. And so it's a policing of public space, what we are seeing now. The protection very often turn on in policing. And who is policing who determine what. We have Smita and then Subha to close the round. And since we have 53 people in the room, it will be difficult for me to scroll down and see your hand raising. Please write also your question or comment into the chat so that we can then also call on you and hear from you. Smita, over to you, and then Subha, if you want to just take over from Smita.
Thank you, Vale. I want to quickly add to what Dana and Shubha have been talking about. And I think one of the things where I left off in my previous comments is that first, have we asked the women who we are protecting if this is what they want, right? Because my former organization, Point of View, did consultations with women's rights groups and feminist organizations from across in different cities. And one of the things that kept coming up again and again is that CCTV cameras and surveillance does not make women feel safer. They feel more monitored, and hence they feel more conscious about the space that they're occupying. This has also been highlighted in research done by our colleagues at Internet Democracy Project in their project looking at gendering surveillance, right? And if you think about it, in a country, in spaces where there's already a wide digital gender gap, and a lot of it is because women's internet usage and mobile phone usage is actually monitored by male members of their family. This sort of surveillance is just a macrocosm of that. And this is particularly scary when all the information and recording that is being collected is going to this invisible database, which is managed by this big brother kind of, police structure. And we are supposed to trust that they are doing it for our safety, right? Another question is, what are the data that we are collecting? There is no information on that. There is no information on where this is being stored, how this is being stored, and for how long this is being stored. And a lot of information is also collected because you're just used to collecting it, which is really strange. And this is a trap that civil society also falls into sometimes, right? Like, for example, when I was registering for APrIGF, I identify as non-binary. I do not identify with the binary genders of man or woman. And increasingly in the recent years, the discourse of gender being a spectrum keeps coming up. When I registered for APrIGF and I was submitting a proposal, actually this same session's proposal, I opted for other as my gender option. I didn't get an option to specify it. Since then, in the selection form, in the abstract, which has appeared online everywhere, it says other Smita V and the session title. For everyone else, it's Miss someone else and session title, or Mr. someone else and session title. Now, I'm not saying that this could be potential, this might be the point of danger for me, but it could be. And how do I know that? Right? And this sort of, and also the bigger question is like, why are we collecting this particular data, right? Why do we need this particular sort of salutation? Why do we need salutation which is of Mrs. Miss? We don't need that. As people who are looking at human rights frameworks as a part of a mechanism which is looking at wider human rights, it's also a question that we need to constantly ask ourselves: what data are we collecting? And finally, with gender being a spectrum, with sexual orientation being a spectrum, with everything being a spectrum actually right now, no identity is in binary and no identity is in itself. We exist as intersectional identities because we are made up of multiple identities. In this kind of a scenario, can binary codes really hold non-binary identities, right? And particularly speaking about gender, in the past, like when we talk about women's safety, are we really throwing some people under the bus in the name of protecting women? Is a question which we really seriously need to ask. I think sometime last year, there was this news which had come out which said that a university campus was actually putting cameras outside women's bathrooms. And this camera would scan the people who are entering. And if the camera reads the person as male, then it will immediately sound an alarm inside the bathroom and at the security guard's office, right? What does this mean? So you have an idea of how a woman is supposed to look. If you don't match with the idea of how a woman is supposed to look, then you cannot enter this bathroom. And then what happens to people who do not fit the conventional norms of man or woman who enter a bathroom, like, right? And this is as simple as a bathroom, but this is not restricted to that. In the past, we have seen this happen in airports. When you get scanned by security at airports, again, you get divided by gender. The technology which is scanning you, which is supposed to be the easier way of doing things, is also based on the same antiquated ideas of how we see gender, right? When you bring in other intersectionalities, this becomes even more problematic, as you can see with what is happening with the Black Lives Matter movement in America right now, or the fact that during the protests in India, which happened earlier in the year, now they're cracking down on dissenters, activists, protesters. Now that people are, confined to their homes, but they have footage and videos, and there are explicit instances where police was taking video footage. I'm aware that my vale is just saying that my time is over, so I shall stop here. But thank you.
Subha, you can just go, because we want to leave the last 15 and 15 minutes for questions and comments from all of you. Subha.
Sure, thanks, Vale, and thanks, Smita, for, I think, just really perfectly kind of segueing into everything that I wanted to touch on. So just to give a little bit of context again about Sri Lanka, a couple of years ago, I believe in about 2018, and this really goes right to your point, Smita, even about how even civil society and NGO human rights actors kind of fall into these traps sometimes. So about 2 years ago, a major women's rights NGO here, particularly, one that works particularly with survivors of domestic violence. It's a, very big and kind of national level women's rights NGO here in Sri Lanka, along with a major INGO, I think working together with the police, actually launched an app that was around women's safety. And the way the app works is, similar to many other kind of women's safety apps. I think it connects you to the police, but also to other select contacts. I think you can have 5 contacts or something like that. But the interesting thing is we're not really sure what kind of process was used to develop it, right? Like, as far as we know, no other kind of stakeholders or other kinds of people or groups were really consulted in this process. So again, this kind of comes back to what is safety and the safety of who, right? So, for example, I mean, just as many of my colleagues have already said, in Colombo as well, we have, nth number of experiences of trans and trans people, of trans folks, and of sex workers, for example, who are particularly criminalized and, penalized by the state, who obviously don't feel safe calling the police if something, if they're, if a sex worker is being assaulted by a client, she or he definitely cannot call the police, right? Also, we have laws that still criminalize same-sex sexual conduct in Sri Lanka. So, broadly, LGBTIQ people are not really going to call or interact with the police. Of course, people with disabilities, but also many other kinds of women and many other kinds of people don't really have trust in the system or have trust in the police to kind of reach out to the police as a response, right? So I think, like Shubha said, it doesn't really get to the causes. And I think, it also really doesn't understand anything about violence, though the data and the research 100% exists, right? They're just not ever listening to those of us that have been doing the research and that have the data. I think Smita's example about the bathroom and the body scanner that alerts the security guard if there's a man in the woman's bathroom, I think is a really excellent example, because of the debate that has come up in other parts of the world about trans people and the kind of, what kind of bathroom can trans folks use. Because we know that rapists have not typically been waiting in disguise in women's bathrooms historically to assault or rape women, right? Like, that has almost probably never happened. We know where violence occurs. It occurs in the home, it occurs in the workplace, it occurs on the street. So, I mean, I think, again, I think we really have to kind of keep just showing that, we have the data, we have the knowledge, and really the problem is that we are not being consulted, right? I think, what I just want to end with is, going back to my point about the world-class city and the relocations, and the kinds of ways in which actually the forced relocations also make women very vulnerable. And I just quickly want to read just a couple of sentences from this essay that was written about urban planning and development in Colombo and Lahore. And in that they said, quote, "In their old homes, women relied on kin and neighbors to keep an eye on their laundry or to help with childcare. The druggies who stole their clothes were known entities. So women would be vigilant of the familiar and also the unknown. Relationships built over a lifetime gave women mobility and security. In the apartments, they say they feel like chickens in a coop. Even in cases where entire communities have been moved to a single high-rise complex, women spoke of how day-to-day interactions with neighbors had changed dramatically because they no longer met each other on a daily basis. Even where a single street had been moved into one floor, women asserted that it was not the same. It was through the day-to-day interactions outside their homes, sitting on their porches, sweeping their part of the road, and also participating together in religious and cultural festivals that women built social networks." So I just want to end with that, that also the understanding of what does keep us safe is really, really low. And I think there's a lot of ignorance around that as well.
Thank you. Okay, yes, people would like to have a share of link. So as if there are a question and people that want to raise hand, because a smart city, as we say, it's a layer of infrastructure, a layer of software, and a lot of database, no? But the assumption is social. So if we don't have a conversation that's happening between all the actors, the promised future can become more restrictive than opening, no? Instead of facilitate and easiness, it becomes pressure, it becomes control, silence, isolation. So do we have anyone that want to comment, ask a question, a reflection? Because we have 55 people in this room, which means a wealth of story, knowledge, thinking, critical view. So if anyone want to raise an hand or write, I'm very happy to give you the floor.
Hi, Vale. This is the moderator, Jen. I believe there's a question in the chat from Ying Chu. If she would like to take the floor, I could unmute her, or we can also read her question.
Yes, let's hear a voice.
Hello, everyone. I'm Inju Chen from Taipei. Thanks to all the panelists and your sharing. We just talked about the digital literacy this morning, and I heard everyone to talk about the smart city and surveillance or use data on illegal way. So well, the digital literacy will help the to protect women or all genders in the suburb communities, or in the how to make it in the smart city development plan in the schedule. So, thank to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if we have another one or two questions, and then whoever wants from the panelists can just take the floor and answer. Is there anyone else? Any other question in typing and raising? And I'm very happy to have a moderator support because I'm...
Well, there are 2 hands which are raised.
Okay, so let's see. Yes, Manu and Gaia. Okay, so let's have first Manu and then Gaia.
Hello, this is Manju from Taiwan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I think this session is very insightful and I've learned a lot. But like, I think one of the questions I have is, because a lot of the panelists were talking about how actually a lot of women don't think the Women Protection Act is protecting them. But how do you convince, or how do you initiate a conversation with those who like seriously believe that those kind of apps are protecting them? And because all kinds of this surveillance censorship thing, we hear it and we're terrified. But there are really people, for example, my cousin who lives in Xinjiang. I don't know if you guys know the situation about Xinjiang, but I mean, it's a heavily surveillance state. But the thing she only talks about is how safe it is in Xinjiang. And like, you can cross the traffic light and you're immediately spotted. And she was like, oh, this is the safest place on earth. You should visit because it's safe. How do you initiate or like carry out a conversation with those kind of people? And because for now, I think those who know, they know, and those who don't, they don't. How do we break this kind of gap and reach to the other side and, you know, really create a society that we hope that's more friendly to human and less friendly to the surveillance technology? Thank you.
Thank you, Manju. Let's have Gaia then a round of questions. I know that there are other people that want to ask. I would suggest to put also your comment or question in the chat so that we don't lose in case we run out of time. Who want to answer? We have one around digital literacy. Initiate Gaia. Over to you, and then get ready, panelists. Gaia.
Sorry, it took a couple of seconds to unmute me. So, thank you so much for this really interesting panel, especially at a time when we are looking to technology for all sorts of solutions around COVID, right? So I had a question to like flip the understanding around, and it's connected to what Manju just said. The argument that the government and developers of these apps put forward is that this is a small price to pay if there is a remote chance that you're going to be saved in an incident of danger, right? It's perhaps a small price to pay if you're missing for a few minutes and we're able to actually spot you, or if your phone goes missing, we're able to spot you. So how do you respond to that argument? And then that obviously is followed by, if not this, then what? Do you have a better solution? That's always sort of the argument present. It's how do you respond to that?
Thank you. So Subha has put her answer into the chat. But let's hear any of the panelists want to add and respond to any of the question, all of them, quickly and shortly. Who wanna?
I can.
Yeah.
I can. Answering the one from digital literacy. I think digital literacy is really important at this time, right? There is no doubt about it. I think while we are talking about women's safety and all this technology built around women's safety, the thing is, again, we have to question, so who are we putting the burden so that they are not being violated, right? Because women are always being told not to wear short skirt, not to walk on dark alleys so that they don't get violated. But are we now again asking these women now to go and learn something so that you would be protected or be safer from something? So just we need to unpack that a bit. At the same time, I think the idea of these safety apps, I think that might also answer the second question, and from Gaia as well, the third question. But also the idea and assumption that we are promoting from these technology, right? That all men are violent and all women are poor and marginalized, and they are really not able to protect themselves. So this binary idea of who men are and what women are is also something we need to unpack, because men like Dalit men from indigenous community, genderqueer person, they also have less power. So this whole violence, and then why violence happens, is actually because someone has more power over someone else, right? It's not about women and men, and men having always having perpetuating nature, and women always being poor and marginalized. So also just need to unpack that. And I think in terms of why people would feel certain surveillance is okay, because the second question was around this person might feel perfectly fine when they step into the state where it's being heavily surveilled, because we have that is what they try to do, right? Normalize surveillance to the extent that it's kind of shaping our behavior. They are asking us to do certain things indirectly, and we are kind of doing it. So what is it also saying is okay, so people who are of violent nature, or people who can perpetuate violence, are not perpetuating violence because they are being watched. So what happens when they are not being watched then? Are people not doing violence just because they are being watched? What happens when they are not where there's no CCTV camera, let's say? What about the behavior of people? What about when are we going to look into the social and then cultural element and the system of patriarchy that actually promotes these kind of violence and then violent nature? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to add? There is also an interesting conversation into the chat. Smita,
yeah, I think I'll just maybe I'll just say it out loud as well, Vale, because I think it's a very important kind of conversation and a point. I mean, I think just to again reiterate what Shubha is saying in some way as well, is that the only real way to combat violence against women is really to strengthen women's rights, right? It's to really ensure that women can exercise their right, women and all people can exercise their right to the freedom of expression, the freedom of association and assembly, both online and on ground, to ensure that women can exercise their right to autonomy, that women can make decisions that have influence over how their lives turn out, to really strengthen laws that give women good workplaces with equitable pay, so good labor protection, good social protection. And I think that's true for anybody. I don't think it's just true in the case of violence against women. I think really the only sustainable way to combat violence is to strengthen people's rights. And I think any other kind of intervention strategy is merely going to be serving, not serving the people that you're setting out or claiming to want to serve.
Thank you. And I know that Dan and Smita want to add. Thanks for all the insight. I will save this chat. Dana?
Yeah. Hi. I want to talk. I think the question about digital literacy actually related. One more thing I want to add, because we talk about women's body and we talk about different gender class, but there is one thing I want to talk is age. So when we talk about women's safety, so what kind of body in your mind? So it's usually between 11, young girl and women who are in their 20 to 40s, but like what about old women? And when we think about old women, then we think about what about their access to technology? What about their knowledge and capacity in terms of technology? So I think basically I can see it's technology and our knowledge about technology actually creating another hierarchy within the people who are using it. And so when we talk about digital literacy, actually we're talking about we talk with people who know how to use technology already, and what about like people who do not even have access to those technology, who didn't have any chance learning chance of technology? I feel, and also when we talk about digital literacy, what kind of knowledge do we mean? Because knowledge is constructed by different people, by different private sector, and now it's more complicated because big tech are super interested in constructing this kind of knowledge because they're driven by their interest. So as NGO, as feminist organization, what kind of role we can play in the whole knowledge construction in terms of digital literacy, and how we can ensure people with less access to technology are able to access to the knowledge we create because we are less exposed. So I think that's one thing I want to add. It's not answer, but it's just some thoughts. And also this related to another thing like women's protection. Because like when we talk about women's protection, they always feel like women who have less knowledge of technology are protected, and who provide those protection. There's people who know more technology, people who can use this technology, and people who can develop this technology. Then what says, but in most cases, it's just a basic two different group. But what can we change the situation? I think it's more like how women who know technology can become the group provide protection for ourselves. And yeah, I think that's all.
Yeah. So as you can see, we got 2 minutes more. So maybe I can ask Smita if you want to just close for everyone with some thoughts, no? About there are no shortcut solution, I understand. But the last minute for Smita, while I thanks everyone for this very lively conversation. Mita.
Thank you very much. And very quickly, I think this dichotomy of privacy versus safety is also very constructed. No one is saying that security is not important or safety is not important. But I think it's important that we question how are we doing this, no? If we are saying that certain data collection is important, then one of the things to make it better and more ethical and based on a human rights framework is to make it more transparent. Tell me what data you're collecting. Tell me where you're going to keep it. Tell me where you're going to use it. And that is the ethical way of going about it. If you say that certain, like for example, census is important for planning certain public, systems in a country and make sure that the most underprivileged are taken care of, right? But is it transparent? To a very large degree, it was transparent. Right now, we don't know what's happening with it. That's a whole other ballgame. But the idea is not that you completely disavow and say that this shouldn't happen at all, but the scale at which it's happening. Is it just data or is it becoming big data? Are you connecting this to all my databases? Where are you using my data? Right? These are some of the very important questions, I think. And I think the binary construction of safety versus privacy is kind of erasing this nuance. And I think that is what we need to be extremely careful about. This also goes into the fact, and like Shubha has added in the chat, that if you're going to use these technologies, then tell the people involved that what you're using. Ask them what would work, what will not work, right? These are the other alternatives rather than over large surveillance, over extensive data collection, and just saying that, you know what, we have to trust you. Why should we trust you? Give us reasons to trust you, right? In fact, one of the key arguments which says that how do you keep people safe in a country and what has worked, and this has come up again and again in the COVID time also, that it is not that you just collect data, but the government has to build a system of trust among the people, that people are then willing to give you the information and data because they trust you and believe that you're going to use it for the betterment of the society. And I think this is a very long process. This cannot happen tomorrow. But this dichotomy which has been built is also is done by military, by militarized police, by states which want to keep you under check, right? And this is a very important thing that we need to keep in mind when challenging those who say that, oh, but I can give up privacy. But who can give up privacy? Who has the privilege to give up privacy is the ultimate question, which I think we need to keep asking whenever new technology keeps coming in, right? Who is actually consenting to go in and who is giving in meaningful consent? So I think this is something which we need to take forward when talking about safety and technology. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think my clock said that it's 18 past the hour, so I don't want to invade other people's space. We're very, very proud and happy because this is a difficult conversation and everyone was joining. 55 people thinking together, sharing and listening. It's encouraging, no, for a very complex conversation. So no shortcut, but just really making sure that the safety, it's not the security of small. That safety is not about accumulating data for further exploitation. No, we want to live a better life, and safety should be the quality of life, not the way in which we are controlled. No, I don't want to give up my happiness to cross the street with safety. So thank you, everyone. I think we ran out of time, and I hope, I imagine that the chat will be also saved so that we can have all this wonderful insight. And thanks for being the people you are in all the places where you are fighting for the right cause, the cause of human happiness, regardless of the gender, the class, the age. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Vale, for moderating the session.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.